What's up everybody, welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to take this, which is a big pile of pallet wood, and we're going to turn it into this. Okay, so the first step that we need to take is laying out all of the pallet wood in the way that I want it to look. Now this bed frame is a little bit different in that I wanted it to be able to lift up so I could store things underneath it. So we're gonna have to get a little bit creative here because I'm gonna have to hollow out the center of it and make room for that platform to sit on top and be supported, as well as be able to lift up. So there's a couple things you want to be looking for when you're getting this all lined up if you want it to line up evenly. First thing is going to be good pallets. You want to make sure the pallets are clean, not used, haven't been used to transport any kind of like chemicals, because that chemical can then come into your house and make your whole room smell bad. So avoid that. And then the other thing to look for is that these pallets are lining up evenly, because you don't want a bunch of big gaps between the pallets once it's all put together. So I bought 12 pallets overall. That should be plenty. I have a little bit of extra over here, as you can see. Now I do actually have one layer of this already done that I did beforehand just to make this a little bit smoother, but it's all the same. I'm basically doing the exact same thing here as I did on the first layer, just to add that second layer and bring it up a little bit. And one of the pieces that I do already have is the center piece right here, because what I did is, instead of having a full pallet in the middle, I cut it off about right here. So it's basically from here over, instead of a full piece. It takes up a lot of space if you did 3 full pallets. You could actually get away with just using 2 pallets if you just wanted to make a bed frame out of it and not do the centerpiece like I want to do. But I wanted about 10 inches or so around the entire bed to really kind of frame it up. So here's how this is going to ultimately kind of be laid out. So you've got the centerpiece, which is already finished. And then we're gonna make cuts that will open up this middle section more. And those cuts are gonna be over here to the middle support, and then up here before the middle support, all the way up to the top. And then same thing over here. We're gonna cut over to where this piece is in the center here, the center support, and then we'll cut up through all the way to the top. Okay, so the framing is done. You can see how this comes down and L's over, makes that whole rectangular area. That's where the storage is gonna be. We're gonna sand everything minus this piece. We'll sand it, burn it with the torch over there, and then we'll seal it all. The sanding in this project is by far the piece that takes the longest, so I'm not gonna film everything, but essentially what I'm doing is I'm using a rotary sander, and I'm using a 60 grit and then 120 grit to do the finishing sand. So the places that I'm gonna sand are going to be right across the top right here, just everywhere where my skin is gonna be touching. Make sure I get everywhere that has the nails all smoothed out and clean. And then I'll also sand the inside of each one of these. But I'm not overly concerned with the outer pieces because my feet and my skin are not gonna be touching that, nor are they gonna be touching this bottom piece. So I'm not gonna be overly concerned with the bottom, just basically the top and the sides. The sanding is done, and now it's time for the fun part, burning everything. So we have all the pieces of wood done here. This is all sanded down to about 120 grit paper. And we're gonna take that blowtorch right there, have an extra can just in case, and we are gonna torch everything except that piece that's already done. So one thing you're gonna wanna make sure you do is just get a rag or like a air compressor or something and blow off all the dust of each one of these pieces before you burn it, because otherwise little bits of sawdust will get caught inside the cracks and crevices, and it will make it like, it'll make it burn weird, and it'll make some of the burn stuff fall off after you've already done it. So make sure you're burning clean pieces of wood. burning is all done. This is what the end result is looking like so far. So we've got all of the wood grain burnt in, as well as everything is cut, sanded, and ready to be sealed. You can see I did all the edges as well as the base. So anywhere you look into the bed frame, you're gonna see that it is completely burnt. It all looks like it's supposed to be like that. So the last piece that I need to do in terms of getting the wood ready to go inside and finish building the bed frame is I need to seal it. So this is the sealant I'm gonna use. It's this polyurethane stuff. I decided to go, let's focus there, with a matte finish. I just wanted it to look as kind of natural as possible with the wood right here. And then I'll screw everything together, get the final pieces set up inside, and we'll be done. So let's seal it. Okay, so we have all the pallets sealed. They're just gonna dry, gonna give those about 24 hours or so. Then we can move those up into the room, get everything situated so that we can figure out the platform piece. Now, I kind of did that and set it all up beforehand. And the only reason I did that was because I wasn't exactly sure how I was gonna do it in the first place, so I thought it would be better to just explain it after I've done it so that it makes more sense for you. So I think the best place to start is from the outside, out here, and work our way to the inside, because the inside is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So I had to figure out how I was gonna tie the top piece to the bottom piece so that the top wasn't gonna be sliding around if I were to step on it, adjust in bed, or anything like that. So the way I decided to do that is on each one of the corners going around the outside of the bed frame, I took a screw, went from the bottom and screwed it from the bottom up into the top piece, kind of at a diagonal angle, and screwed it into this block right here. So around each corner, there's about a 2-inch screw that goes from the bottom up into the top block. And that secures everything so that it's not sliding around. If I try and lift up on it, it doesn't move. It all moves as one piece. So this is not going anywhere. The only other place that I put additional screws aside from the inside of it is around the headboard to secure the headboard to the base. I did the same thing that I did with the corners right here, just on the back piece. So I took a screw, put it on the back right here, and I screwed that into this block right here. So I'm gonna show you how I secured all the individual pieces on the base into kind of one cohesive unit, but that's gonna involve opening up the center, so buckle up because this is where it gets a little bit more creative. Okay, so we have the headboard here, comes down to the base, and inside the centerpiece, you can see that there are 2 layers of plywood. Basically, I just cut 2 that are the exact same size, and they end up being pretty much flush with the top right here, which is where the top sheet of plywood for the center is gonna go. And then I just took a bunch of screws, screwed it into the back right here, which is the headboard, and I did that kind of all the way through. And then I used some L brackets up at the top to tie the top section of the base to the headboard itself. So that's what that L bracket is there for. And then I did the same thing on this side as well. So moving down from the headboard, we have the first separation of pallet right here. And if you look on this side, it's gonna be easier to show you on this side. I do have some metal brackets that are tying it together. So I have one on this side, and then I also have one on this side, right down there at the bottom. And that bracket is tying together the front piece to the back piece. I did also put that same bracket back here. It was a little bit tricky to screw it into place, but it's basically on the bottom layer, down underneath there, just on the back side of the blocks. So basically I've got a bracket there and a bracket there on the very bottom layer underneath everything, so it's pretty well hidden. You're not gonna really notice it. And then instead of screws, I actually used some extra pallet wood to tie the top piece to the bottom piece on the inside. So this is a little bit different in that I didn't use a screw to go up from the bottom into the block right there. I actually just took an extra piece of pallet wood, screwed it in at a couple different points, and I used that to tie the top piece to the bottom piece. The back piece is basically tied together the same way that I tied the headboard together up front. I took 2 sheets of plywood, screwed those together, and then basically screwed them into the blocks on each section of pallet. So I have some extra pallet wood that ties the top to the bottom piece on the back right here. And then the plywood right here is also doubled up and then screwed in at multiple points as you go down. So that's how I tied the entire base together, as well as tied the base to the headboard. Hopefully that all makes sense. If not, go back and watch it again. It probably will make sense the second time. If not, drop a comment and I'll help you out. So moving on to the top piece, which is gonna be the center right here, the supports there, as well as the piston lifts. So as you can see, the top layer is just one solid sheet of plywood, which I was super happy about. I trimmed it down to fit inside of the middle section. I actually bought 2 sheets of plywood, and the second sheet of plywood came in handy for tying everything together as far as the base and the headboard goes. So where I had those 2 sheets of plywood that were screwed together, that were screwed into the top as well as the bottom here, that's where that second sheet of plywood came in handy. And it also doubles as additional support for the very bottom as well as the very top. So if we open this back up, then you can see there's actually 2x4s that go, there's 2 of them that go across the middle, and that acts as support for this whole middle section right here. So these 2x4s, they're trimmed to where they're gonna be able to come down and go over the top of this section right here. And then I took some extra pallet wood, screwed it in right there. And so this 2x4 is gonna come down and it's gonna rest right on top of this block right here. And then it's gonna do the exact same thing on this side, as well as over there and back here. So the way that I measured this all out is after I had this whole base layer basically lined up to where I wanted it, I took the 2x4s right here and I laid them down before screwing them into the plywood, laid them down on these supports right here that they were gonna be resting on. And then I laid the plywood down on top of that and I screwed them in accordingly. If you wanted to go a little bit higher end, I guess you could probably find some metal support brackets that were gonna go into the same places as the extra wood over there. But I wanted to keep this as cheap as possible, and so I just used the extra materials that I had, which was pallet wood, and I made some blocks that were gonna support it, and it did fine. So at this point you have everything tied together, all of the bases tied together. You have a solid set of plywood in the center. This isn't going anywhere. It's solid, it's supported. The only thing left to do is add in the lift mechanism. The lift mechanism is pretty interesting in that if you notice, when it's laying flat, it's all flush. But when it actually lifts up, the whole centerpiece kind of lifts up a little bit and then comes out. So I had to figure out a way to install everything while it was laying flat, so that when it came up and lifted out, it was gonna go back into place. I basically took each lift without the hydraulic piston on it, which this comes off, and that will free up movement in the bracket itself. When this comes down, I knew that the lift mechanism had to lay flat with the section of plywood that was supporting it. So with this flush, I basically marked the holes on the bottom bracket of where I was gonna drill those holes for the bottom support of the bracket, and that's where I made those holes for that. And that way when this bracket would come up and out, it would support everything, but when it came back down, it would put everything back into place and it would sit flush with the bottom support as well as the top support, and everything would basically go back into place. Now figuring out how I was gonna drill the top holes is kind of where things got interesting, because I had to basically lay the plywood flat on top of myself while I was laying inside of this section, inside of the storage section. So I laid flat with these hydraulic or gas pistons disengaged, and then I brought the sheet of plywood down on top of myself, and I had a pen in there with me, and I basically figured out where this bracket lined up with the plywood on the inside right here, and I traced a hole where that hole is gonna be drilled, and then I lifted the plywood back up, crawled out, and then that's where I drilled my hole for the top piece. So here's kind of a different view of what I was talking about. So with the bracket laying flat, with everything kind of brought down, this top bracket that's gonna screw into this side of the plywood for the middle section is gonna lay flat with the support right here. So with this laying flat and flush with the supports, I basically circled out where I was gonna drill the holes for the bottom support bracket, and I drilled those first. And then once that was done, I kept this low, still disengaged with this hydraulic piston or this gas piston, and I brought the whole sheet of plywood down on top of myself, and you can kind of see on this backside that there's a small circle right here, and that is the circle that I drew while I was basically laying underneath inside this section, and it lined up with this hole as well as the one back there in the back. I do think there's a better way to do The whole lift mechanism, aside from having to like contort your body and lay underneath inside the storage space and bring that down on top of you. I think the better way to do that would have been secure all of the base pieces together so you kind of have one solid base. And then once you have that solid base, you can just take it, flip it up with basically this whole middle piece intact and laying flat where it's supposed to be. And then you can just circle where those holes are gonna be at, drill them, and you don't even have to lay underneath. But this was kind of a trial and error process for me. I've never built something like this. This was the first time, and so I had to get creative, and that was the best way that I could think of at the time to do it. The only thing that I haven't shown you how to install is just this handle that I added, which basically I just used a nylon strap for. It's super easy. I just took an extra nylon strap and I put 6 screws in the bottom. You can see kind of right there. And then I cut those off from this end, filed them down, made them smooth so they weren't gonna catch on anything. And that is how I pieced together my bed frame. So I'm not gonna lie, it took a lot more work than I was expecting, but seeing it all turn out the way that I kind of envisioned it in my head was super satisfying. So I am glad that I did it. Just a ton more work than I was planning on, especially for the storage piece in the center. Everything that I used in terms of like the lift mechanisms and tools that I needed to build this, I'll link in the video description down below, just in case you want to use this kind of as a guide to build your own pallet bed. If you do, I would love to see it. So let me know if you use this. Aside from that, thanks a ton for watching. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. I'll see you next time.